Hello guys, Counterfactual History here, and I'm here with the new campaign trail game. And because my channel is, obviously named Counterfactual History, and a lot of it is focused on alternate history scenarios, I figured we would start out the new campaign trail playthroughs with a well-known alternate history timeline that is present in the mods of this game, and that is called the 1916B timeline, or that's what it's officially called. I think most people just refer to it as what if Theodore Roosevelt had won a third term in 1912. But yeah, so we're going to be playing through this. We're going to play through all three elections for this timeline that the creators have created, and we're going to do all of the candidates. So we're going to be switching between the canon candidate who won for one video, and then the candidate who lost canonically in the timeline for the other video. So we're going to do a playthrough of the canon route and try to win with the three canonical the candidates who won in this alternate timeline, and then we're going to play the three losing candidates and see if we can win with them. So in this timeline, it starts out obviously with Theodore Roosevelt winning a third term in 1912. And then we're picking up in 1916, and this is the key difference is that after the sinking of the Lusitania, President Theodore Roosevelt successfully brought the United States into the Great War going on in Europe, and William Jennings Bryan is attempting to unseat him and put an end to American involvement in World War I. So, canonically in the timeline of 1916B, Bryan actually wins this election, so we're going to be playing as him first. So, he's a Democrat, he's from Florida. William Jennings Bryan was a very populist, a very progressive candidate, very good speaker, very good campaigner. He ran for president 3 times in our timeline. So in this alternate timeline, this would actually be his 4th run for a presidency. But yeah, so he's very anti-imperialist, and so it makes sense for him to be in staunch opposition to Theodore Roosevelt's involvement in World War I. So he's running on, trying to get America out of World War I after the sinking of the Lusitania, which was a British passenger liner, but 128 Americans died whenever the Germans sank it. Which I think is, I could totally see Theodore Roosevelt. If he had won a third term, I could totally see him going into World War I because of the Lusitania. But, so yeah, we're going to have to carefully balance Bryan's appeals to the common man and its efforts to present himself as the commercial elite's last hope. Because, so the weird thing about this is that both William Jennings Bryan and Theodore Roosevelt were very progressive candidates and very much sticking up for, the common man and trying to improve life for everybody. And so Theodore Roosevelt was pretty well known for starting the process of trust busting, which is basically breaking up big businesses into smaller ones so that way monopolies don't form. So because of that, a lot of rich people did not like Roosevelt at all. So we're gonna have to try and focus on winning over, the common people and the rich elite, because Theodore Roosevelt would also have a very solid base with the common people because of his progressive agenda. So basically, there's two progressives running, but one of them, us, has to manage both a progressive agenda and a, trying to appeal to the rich. Especially because I think one of the biggest flaws with William Jennings Bryan's campaign is that he really did not have the money that the Republicans did. But yeah, so we're gonna have to stake out positions on mobilization, which we'll oppose because we want to get out of World War I. Roosevelt's new nationalism, which is that progressive agenda that Theodore Roosevelt had, so we're gonna have to take a stance on that. America's role in the Great War, which is we want out. And we're also going to have to talk about labor disputes and social issues of the day. And he was actually a very progressive candidate on that. I think he supported women's suffrage and direct election of U.S. senators and such. So yeah, I'm trying to remember which. So I am gonna go with the canon, vice presidential pick, who I believe is, I think it's Champ Clark. I could be wrong, but let's see. So he's been a Speaker of the House since 1910, runner-up to the Democratic nomination in 1912. He supported pieces of Roosevelt's new nationalism, but vehemently opposed America's entry into the war in Europe. He has some relations with prominent conservative Democrats and has proven his legislative acumen by forcing his own version of Roosevelt's agenda through to passage. A progressive-leaning Democrat with some populist bona fides, Champ Clark is the expected choice for vice president, who will be palatable to the whole party. So, yeah, we're going to have to go with Champ Clark, because I think he's the canonical one. Alright, so main theme of the speech to the Democrat convention in St. Louis. So we've got one talking about how Roosevelt's new nationalism didn't go far enough in improving life for the working man, and proposing new bold measures aimed at reducing the power of trust and increasing that of the average American. I don't know if that one's the best one since we want to try to win some of the rich elite over, so we might not do that one. This one is for the good of our republic and for the good of the world. We need to get out of this great war and broker a final peace agreement if possible. The disorder in the streets, the draft, and rationing all must come to an end if we are to at long last repair our defects as a nation. I think that's a pretty solid one because, the Democrat Party would probably be fairly unified in opposing World War One. I stand before you today as a man of God. Everywhere I go, I see a nation drenched in drunkenness, atheism, and senseless hate. Only through a purge of sin will the country of our fathers reemerge. That one is fitting for William Jennings Bryan. He was very religious, but it's not a good convention speech. I don't think that would win people over. Or we could do, everyone in this hall knows me and the causes I've stood for all of these years, but I would like to say I am open to compromise given what's at stake in November. Roosevelt is too tyrannical, bloodthirsty, and ham-fisted to remain in office any longer. So yeah, I mean, it is true. Everyone would probably know what William Jennings Bryan runs for at this point. I mean, this would be his 4th time. But I don't know if saying, oh, we're open to compromise would be good, per se. It kind of would seem like abandoning some of our old positions, which I don't think would be a good look. So I think we're just going to have it be about opposition to World War I. So, as expected, your campaign will focus on the war, for better or worse. Hopefully better. Seems to be. We seem a little bit more yellow, because yellow is our color. So far we do have a very solid lead over Roosevelt. I do believe eventually he starts to reverse that, but hopefully we can maintain it. So your selection of Champ Clark as running mate has helped you reconcile the Democratic establishment, but print media is now re-examining his role in disrupting the 1911 Canadian-American Reciprocity Treaty. I feel like I mispronounced that, but oh well. With a single gaffe on the House floor. Editorials across the country are now questioning how he will impact peace talks and compensation negotiations should you win the election. Okay, so we can tell Clark to hold his tongue, which is not a great look. We can talk about how he's a brilliant legislator, dedicated progressive, and common son of Missouri. His instincts are exactly what are needed if true diplomacy is to be conducted. Or we can say diplomacy in my administration will be left to the diplomats. I can assure you Clark will be limited only to his duties as vice president. I think that's a pretty solid middle ground, is saying he's just going to be the vice president and not a diplomat. So we're going to do that. Clark isn't exactly thrilled by this, but your assurances do well in smoothing over this controversy. Exactly. So, are there any states where we're looking weak? I mean, West Virginia, I guess. It's not an important state. I think Iowa's the next closest one. Just want to maintain our lead, because right now we're on set to kind of sail through the election. So, Williams Barnes Jr. is the owner of the Albany Evening Journal and a towering figure within the National Republican Party due to the sway he holds in New York politics. A longtime enemy of Roosevelt and an old guard Republican, Barnes finds himself in St. Louis on this sweltering summer day, telling your aides he would like to speak with you about setting up a possible meeting between you, him, and the oil magnate John D. Rockefeller. They are planning on paying off Republican political bosses to ignore Roosevelt this November. Will you accept his offer? So, the weird thing is, like I said, it's two progressives running against each other. So setting up a deal between, the likely very conservative William Barnes Jr. and the monopoly owner, John D. Rockefeller, probably isn't a great look, but also it is a ton of money, and turning the Republicans against Roosevelt, which was already something that kind of happened in 1912 whenever the Republican Party split between Roosevelt and the more conservative Taft. It could definitely help. So we can meet with them directly and bring some muckrakers along to expose the corruption of the Republican political machine. I don't think that would work because those people are very clearly, anti-Roosevelt, so it would just kind of solidify Roosevelt's base. We can say absolutely not the sort of backroom dealing with robber barons, which is what they used to call those monopoly owners like Rockefeller and Carnegie and Vanderbilt. They called them robber barons, which is fairly accurate. They were incredibly rich and had way more sway than they should have. So, yeah, robber barons is a fitting title. So we can reject that, which might be a solid option. We can do this rendezvous through proxies. Won't promise them anything other than an immediate end to Roosevelt's disastrous mobilization policies. Or we can say, I'll promise an immediate end to Roosevelt's disastrous mobilization policies and throw in some Republican appointments to sweeten the deal. Not going to do that. That's too many concessions. I honestly think it's probably best if we just say we're going to end the mobilization policies, which is something we would already do with our opposition to World War I. And it could potentially split the Republicans, so we're going to try it. Barnes and Rockefeller are satisfied Republican political bosses across the country enter into secret agreements to mudsling Roosevelt and not push their voters to cast ballots for president in November. So that one's even better. We now have a chance at pushing for Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut. So let's see. United States entered the Great War in June of 1915 after the sinking of the Lusitania. American troops have yet to engage in the conflict in any major way, and the Allies seem to be on their heels after the Gallipoli debacle and setbacks on the Eastern Front. Since the beginning of the conflict, you have been against U.S. involvement. How do you plan to end U.S. participation in the war? So the Gallipoli debacle is basically the British and Anzac forces tried to do a landing near the Dardanelles Strait. They tried to do a landing there, and the Ottomans basically halted their advance, and then they were forced to retreat from that area. So that's the Gallipoli debacle. And then the Eastern Front is basically Germany and Austria-Hungary just pushing Russia back. Eventually Russia will fall out of the war to revolution, but that hasn't happened yet, and it won't happen during this election. But let's see. So we need to talk about how to end American participation. We can broker diplomatic talks between the Allies and Central Powers on the first day of my presidency. I don't think that would work, and I think that's kind of an unrealistic thing to promise. I don't think they would be negotiating at this stage. A full withdrawal is in order. Our boys must leave Europe, and we ought to sign a separate deal with Germany that promises immunity for American shipping on the high seas. That one's probably okay, but it is also a little bit defeatist, which isn't ideal. We can say we're going to continue the war, which is just no, we're not going to be doing that. Or we could propose an ultimatum to the British and French. If they refuse to hear the cries for freedom of the natives in Africa and Asia any longer, we will have no choice but to circumvent their naval block. Yeah, that's the worst possible option. That's basically backstabbing our allies and going so far as to support Germany, all for the sake of ending colonialism, which makes sense for him. He's anti-imperialist, but, yeah, that is just not a popular position, and that would end our campaign. I think it's probably this one's the best one. Might seem a little defeatist, but that's the best one we're gonna get. While a bit jarring to some moderates, your stance is a favorite among the anti-war coalition and anti-mobilization conservatives. So yeah, we lost how close we were in New York and Illinois, but I think that's the best we were gonna get out of that. We're gonna push for Illinois. That's a pretty close one, so. Since the Great War began for America, President Roosevelt has overseen a dramatic expansion of the federal government's regulatory power. War production control boards have been established, agricultural price controls have been set, and food schedules have been instituted. Do you believe these measures have pushed the boundaries of federal authority, and do you intend to return the government to its pre-war form should you win? So, we can say that the federal government must actively intervene in the market. No, I don't think this type of expansion would be popular. I mean, he's a progressive, but I don't think it's good to be that progressive in this election. Um, so we can say I certainly don't desire a return to the old reality of corporate control, but Roosevelt has clearly overstepped. Regulation within reason is necessary to bolster the prosperity of the common man. That's actually a really good one. I might go with that. The federal government exists to ensure harmony among the states and enforce the Constitution. That is all. Roosevelt has bordered on socialism with these draconian mobilization policy. Yeah, no, we're not running on a return to normalcy. He's too progressive for that. Or we can just say, states authority, which no, that isn't a popular position. That one's definitely the best. It's just a solid position in general. You have maintained your progressive rhetoric while opposing Roosevelt's government interventions. This should be enough for many anti-mobilization Republicans and conservatives to begrudgingly accept your candidacy. So that somehow solidified Roosevelt's control over Illinois and New York. I don't really know how that works, but okay. Last week, Scoville Manufacturing's artillery shell factory in Waterbury, Connecticut underwent a violent strike as workers demanded higher wages and safer conditions after an explosion at an assembly line killed 7 men. The strike spread nationwide, momentarily freezing the ability of American batteries on the Western Front to replenish their stockpiles. President Roosevelt responded today by nationalizing all factories producing ammunition and sending draftees to replace striking workers. How will you react to this? So, I'll always support the common man over the Titan. I can't support this, however, because it's putting American lives at risk during a war I feel is unjust. Mr. Roosevelt should have used other methods besides nationalization to reopen these ammunition plants. This was the act of a tyrant. The strikers' demand should have been met, and the owners of these factories should retain ownership of their legal property. Roosevelt should not have nationalized these industries, but the real tragedy was his refusal to accommodate the needs of workers who are risking their lives in these unsafe factories. I would have forced management to come to the table if I were president. So, I actually think, this one could potentially win over both progressives and conservatives. This one's a very solid way to undercut Roosevelt on terms of progressivism. Yeah, and that one I don't think. That one's too conservative. So it's either one of these two. I think we're probably gonna. Let's say this just was the act of a tyrant. The strikers' demand should have been met, and the owners of these factories should retain ownership of their legal property. I think that's a solid middle ground walk. By supporting the rights of both workers and factory owners, you have managed to thread the needle on this delicate issue. So that's what I was hoping for. For some reason, Oregon is going to fall away, but yeah, we're gonna go there. Like I said, I just want to maintain the lead. So, cable from the front, July 1st, 1916. An Anglo-American force of 13 British divisions and 11 American divisions have launched an offensive across the Somme River led by Field Marshal Douglas Haig and Commander Leonard Wood of the American Expeditionary Force. May God help our boys against the Germans. So, historically, the Battle of the Somme was more or less a disaster. The British got very little ground and they lost, like, hundreds of thousands of lives, I want to say. So, yeah, historically it didn't go well. So, we're trying to get the battle to go poorly so that way people won't want to be involved in World War One. Let's go with the fourth option, because they're all the same. It's just random chance. But we're going to go with the fourth option, since fourth time's the charm for William Jennings Bryan, apparently. The opening barrage annihilated German defenders stationed north of Bapaume Road. I horribly mispronounced that. I am so sorry if, anyone knows how to properly pronounce that. U.S. troops met little resistance as they rushed into the German trenches. American casualties on the first day were close to 2,000, which is surprisingly low for World War One. This will increase support for the war at home. Dang it. Okay, yeah, so Indiana's falling, West Virginia's falling, Oregon and California are polling. Okay, yeah, that kind of sucked. What will be the overall thrust of your economic agenda? So, common prosperity. We must do better than Roosevelt's paltry reforms if we are to truly balance the scales in this country. I propose an inheritance tax, subsidies for farmers, and a national health service. That might be a little too progressive for the time. A New Deal. It's time for structural transformation of our economic system. I propose a federal safeguard of the right to organize, a ban on child labor, social insurance for the elderly, and federal regulation of commercial banking. That one's actually pretty good. Or we can do New Liberty. We require extensive reforms of our institutions if the I tried to say grip and elite at the same time. Whoops. If the grip of elite interests is to be weakened, I call for lower tariffs, the creation of a Federal Reserve, and more zealous antitrust legislation to fight the big trust. Or responsible austerity, sensible rebalancing of the government spending, and increased income taxes on the wealthy to cover our growing debts. That one's nowhere near progressive enough. It's got to be either. That one's too progressive. That one's not progressive enough. It's got to be either New Deal or New Liberty. Hmm. I honestly think so. This one is more in line with the times. New Liberty is. It might be best to go with that one, but a New Deal might be more. It's more progressive, but that might not be a good thing. We're gonna go with what was acceptable for the time. This seems broadly similar to what Wilson's agenda was in our timeline, and he got elected. So we're gonna just try New Liberty. Yeah, this is obviously Wilson's new freedom rebranded, but not rocking the boat here might be to your benefit. So yeah, it seems to mostly be. It does seem like it's solidified West Virginia and Indiana. Let's go back to Oregon. So the temperance movement is gaining influence nationwide with organizations such as the Anti-Saloon League and Women's Christian Temperance Union successfully lobbying 23 state legislatures to pass anti-saloon laws as of this year. In the past, you have voiced support for a federal prohibition of alcohol. Where do you stand on the issue today? Um, let's see. We require a federal prohibition of alcohol for too long the specter of sin has haunted our nation. I mean, this is getting close to the time that prohibition would kick in. It's like somewhere in the 1920s where it actually kicks in, so we're about an election off. We can champion federal anti-saloon laws. I support blocking any entrance to the path of drunkenness, or we can not mention it. I actually think just championing federal anti-saloon laws is a good compromise. It isn't so far radical that, anyone who drinks alcohol won't vote for us, but it also stays consistent with our policies. So, while still on the temperance side of the issue, this should excite prohibition supporters without antagonizing the northern urban vote too much. So yeah, that's kind of the goal. Seems like it's winning out west, and weakening Illinois, so we might be able to get Illinois. That'd be good. One unprecedented aspect of mobilization has been the introduction of price controls for wheat and livestock. This has bolstered farmers in long struggling rural areas across the country. If the Great War ends under your administration, how would you approach agricultural policy? We can say the market ought to dictate the price of food. With increased regulation of railroad rates, farmers will be able to compete in a post-war economy. We can move on to other issues, which, no, we're not going to do that. We require subsidies to encourage high production and increase prosperity for the common farmer, while keeping food prices low for consumers. Price controls should continue indefinitely. If we allow them to expire, American farmers will plunge into financial ruin. We can't do that one. I think that one is too supportive of Roosevelt, so we're gonna have to go with a different one. Um, Increased regulation of railroad rates would be nice. I don't know if it's progressive enough. We might be able to promise subsidies. That's a fairly progressive position, and it should work. Supporting farm subsidies might be your best move here. While a tad out of the mainstream, you have maintained your image as a defender of the common man. I'll take it. I'll definitely take it. Wow, that made everything a lot more yellow. Except for Illinois, of course, but I don't think we're going to get Illinois as much as I want to. We might be able to push for New York, honestly. With campaign season in full swing, which group will you target as you travel the country? Farmers. No, the farmers are very solidly in our base. Industrial workers. I'll visit factory after factory across the industrial Midwest during working hours to capture the support of the labor vote. I'll emphasize my independence from corporate interests and tout my plans to improve life for the common man. That one's pretty good. Democratic political bosses. I'll attend several meetings with the leaders of my party's political machines and promise limited action fighting corruption during my term. I'll also make sure Champ Clark is in attendance. I don't think we need that one. The Democrats seem to be fully unified behind us. The urban middle class. I'll travel to the fair neighborhoods of New York City, Philadelphia, and Chicago, speaking about my opposition to Roosevelt's extreme mobilization policies and my dedication to a final peace in Europe. I think that one's probably the best. So let's do the urban middle class. This voting bloc has long been skeptical of you, but maybe your vigorous campaigning can change that. Seems to have done something. National print media has recently become fixated on the issue of anarchist agitation in the immigrant quarters of America's cities, blaming recent strikes and general disorder on German-backed anarchist extremists. What will you say regarding these circumstances? So yeah, that was a big thing in America during World War I, is believing that, immigrants were for some reason German infiltrators and anarchists. It wasn't great. Um, yeah. So I don't really want to support that from a moral position because it's just not the right thing to do. Um, let's see. The war is unjust, but if these stories are true, I'd support strong measures to crack down on these militants in our foreign areas before they pose a concrete threat to the American people. We're not going to do that. I will say, I think that's what Wilson did, which is one of the reasons why Wilson is one of, if not the worst president in American history, is, yeah, he targeted immigrants unfairly during World War One, just because of these type of rumors. So, these stories are veiled accusations of treason leveled against German Americans that I simply cannot support. Regardless of country of origin, we should all be presumed loyal to the country we call home. That one's, morally correct, but it also isn't, it's not in line with the popular mood at the time. I cannot in good faith support these facile rumors. I'll remain mum on this and continue campaigning as usual. Or you can say, this war is on... Whoops, I forgot it reshuffles if you open the polls. All I will say is this conflict is inflaming tensions already present in this country, and a swift end to our involvement in Europe would do much to quell the violence in our streets. I think that one's actually the best route to go. This should hit the spot with middle-class voters ambivalent about... I'm mispronouncing that. I am so sorry. About the war and concerned about these stories. Okay, yeah, that actually did us a solid. Let's go to Illinois. We actually are in the lead there now. So President Roosevelt is the first commander-in-chief since 1789 to serve 3 terms, and if he wins this election, he could end up governing for a 4th. Are you going to emphasize this as you campaign? We can say that he's shown an utter disregard for the wisdom and humility of George Washington. I'll mention this frequently on the trail to burnish his image as a tyrant. Wilson attempted to utilize this in 1912, but never seemed to gain any traction. I'd prefer to focus on other issues. Or we ought to be concerned by Roosevelt's willingness to abandon the 2-term precedent, but there are more glaring examples of his authoritarian tendencies that deserve to be highlighted more. I think that's a very solid compromise and gets some good attacks in on Theodore Roosevelt. Especially since, Roosevelt already won his 3rd term, so it's pretty clear that people don't care about the 2-term precedent as much as this attack is expecting them to. So yeah, we're gonna highlight other examples of his authoritarian tendencies. There's nothing wrong with using this as a supplement to other attacks. So, yeah, New York is not, that isn't New York, that's Illinois. Though it does look like New York's also flipping to us, but Illinois seems to be leaning our way. After 2 months of brutal fighting, the Somme offensive has stalled at the village of Ginchy, where a series of German counterattacks have bogged down the Anglo-American forces. American casualties have reached upwards of 100,000, while total territorial gains are best measured in yards. The domestic press is covering the battle with an uplifting tone, but details of the carnage and lackluster results are seeping through to a war-weary American public. How will you use this to your advantage? Let's see. When will this bloodshed end? Douglas Haig and the British command obviously have no regard for American lives, and this is precisely why we must end our involvement in the war. When will this bloodshed end? This war must end as soon as possible. When will this bloodshed end? Roosevelt and Commander Wood are chiefly at fault for the failure of this offensive. It's clear this war has become nothing more than a meat grinder. Or when will this bloodshed end? Our troops are lambs to the slaughter who are being led by hapless shepherds. Do our generals not have a mind among them? I actually think this one, blaming Douglas Haig and the British, is the best one. That way, you can keep the idea of American heroism being dragged down by our allies. So it's like patriotic, but in a way that opposes the war. So I think that one's the best one to do. Not to mention, Haig was the commander of the Somme offensive, so blaming the Somme's failure on the British is an interesting pivot that appeals to those not already in opposition to the conflict. Figured it would. If people think their allies are incompetent, they're less likely to back the war. We do have New York now, so let's see. We're gonna go to New York and try to solidify our lead there. So, in a contentious vote, the Sedition Act of 1916 has passed the Senate and is on track to become law, with some of your fellow Democrats supporting the bill to prevent what Roosevelt called the threat of, quote, German infiltration, unquote. This new legislation allows the Justice Department to prosecute individuals for publicly opposing the conduct of the United States Armed Forces in the current conflict, including speech denouncing the war itself. How will you respond to this development? Oh, cool. So they're basically just accusing me of treason. So-called German infiltration is fear-mongering at its finest. It isn't worth sacrificing our most basic civil liberties for this unjust war. This is bordering on authoritarianism. It seems in order to beat the Kaiser, Roosevelt wants to become one himself by violating our right to free speech. Roosevelt is engaging in political gamesmanship with this outrageous act of tyranny. He is clearly trying to steal this election by silencing my opposition to the war. Don't let him fool you. Or no comment. I think we're just gonna say that this is authoritarianism. I mean, this one is probably true of it is trying to silence Bryan, but also I think saying that, the election is that a candidate is trying to steal the election isn't a great look. So we're just gonna say it's authoritarianism. Good attack. By tying Roosevelt to the Kaiser and autocracy in general, you make many Americans question the morality of the Sedition Act. So passage of the Sedition Act has proved to be the last straw for California Governor Hiram Johnson. A staunch critic of the war and a passionate progressive, Johnson seems to be the Republican most likely to endorse you, as he has contacted your campaign to arrange a meeting between the two of you. What will you say to secure his endorsement? So this could be big. This could turn over a bunch of progressive Republicans. Gaining Johnson's support will be simple. I promise to expand upon Roosevelt's progressive agenda and add new restrictions on East Asian immigration, because that was unfortunately a big thing out west is anti-Asian immigrants. So that could be a route. I'm going to take this a step further. I will offer an invitation to Republican Senators William Borah and Elijah Root to try and convince all three men to support me on the basis of repealing the Sedition Act. Or we can gamble and just not try to augment the campaign strategy and reiterate promises to end the war and roll back Roosevelt's mobilization policies. I'm not going to do that because this could be a huge endorsement. I honestly think we might want to go really far and try to invite the other progressive Republicans to repeal it. So let's see how that goes. A risky gambit, but these men are not aligned in their political views. Root supports the war and feels the Sedition Act doesn't go far enough, while Bora and Johnson are in opposition. You fail to gain any of their endorsements as the meeting collapses into bickering, and Hiram Johnson questions your intelligence for this wrong-headed decision. Not ideal, but it doesn't seem to have changed the election too much. It just kind of sucks. So we're going to New York now. We theoretically have a chance in Wisconsin, but New York's the much bigger prize. So while speaking to a crowd in Pittsburgh, your running mate Champ Clark said, "Annexation oops, I don't know why I said Texas. Annexation of Canada ought to be part of our withdrawal from the Allies. The British couldn't last one more day in this war without our boys. This has hurt you among two key voting blocs, as anti-imperialists oppose new territorial expansion, and wavering supporters of the war now feel you are comfortable with a German victory in Europe. How you minimize the damage caused by this gaffe?" Yeah, so that's a pretty major, gaffe. I don't know why anyone would say that. I need to have a stern conversation with Clark about what he can and can't say on the trail. His impulsivity is a major liability. I don't think that'll do any good. Champ did not think about the effects of his words in this instance. If he apologizes, I'm confident the American people will forget about this. My running mate was clearly telling an elaborate joke to the audience. It's a shame that the press doesn't have a sense of humor these days. I mean, it is very clearly exaggeration, so I don't think he actually meant it, but Clark was only speaking off the cuff in this situation. I am in no way advocating for any territorial concessions and would hope to negotiate a final peace. Allowing either side to win will only prolong the meaningless death and destruction. I think that's probably the best one to go with. Yep, that's apparently my best bet. Seems to be, though. I'm winning more of the Northeast, oddly enough. On January 16th, 1916, Pancho Villa and his band of guerrillas attacked the town of Columbus, New Mexico, killing 8 American soldiers and 10 civilians. Roosevelt immediately dispatched recently mobilized infantry and cavalry divisions led by General John Blackjack Pershing into northern Mexico to pursue Villa. About 20,000 troops remain there to this day, occasionally engaging with Villa's forces. Would you keep those forces in Mexico as president? So yeah, Pancho Villa was a Mexican bandit leader. He did raids into America, so yeah, America did try to hunt him down. I think eventually he was caught, and I think he died of something. I don't remember if he killed himself or was injured and died from it. I just know he did die eventually, I believe. I probably need to do more research into him, but his big thing is, yeah, he did raids into American soil. And then, we tried to hunt him down. So we can say, I'm convinced the smaller force would be more successful when it comes to hunting Villa and his men. It has become clear that our massive troop presence in Mexico is impairing our ability to keep up with Villa's guerrilla bands. A more nimble deployment of 10,000 men could catch him in a matter of weeks. We can say Pancho Villa's despicable attack on innocent Americans justifies such an operation. As soon as we apprehend him, I will withdraw all our troops from Mexico. I trust the Carranza government to enforce its own laws. U.S. troops will have no presence on sovereign Mexican territory. That one is not good. Nobody trusts the Carranza government to actually be able to stop Pancho Villa, especially after his attacks on Americans. So, not gonna do that. Our army in Mexico is just too small to hope to corner him. A larger force of 30,000 men would be able to easily surround Villa and finally bring him to justice. That one, no, we're not going to do. We're not going to advocate for more intervention. I think it's best to say that a smaller force would probably be better. That kind of criticizes Roosevelt and advocates for, less force being used, but it's still, you can make the case that's going to catch Pancho Villa, so we're going to say that. This position manages to capture the middle ground on the issue. Pershing's failure to capture Villa over 6 months. Villa? I might be mispronouncing his name. I think it is Pancho Villa, though. Though I did just change the pronunciation. Okay. I have no clue how to pronounce that, apparently. I will need to do research into that. But it makes your stance particularly convincing to most Americans. So, that's what we want. So we got New York, we got Illinois. We can try to go for Wisconsin as well. The old guard of the Republican Party is intensely dissatisfied with the direction of their party. Roosevelt's progressivism and interventionist mobilization actions have soured their already apprehensive acceptance of the president. How will you go about convincing them you are the lesser of two evils in this race? Unfortunately, I'm not adept at communicating with these big financiers and men of established wealth. I will dispatch my running mate to meet with as many old guard Republicans as possible before Election Day. And Champ Clark apparently did have good relations with the conservatives, so that might be a good one. We're not interested in gaining their votes. No, we are interested in gaining their votes. That option sucks. We could just assume that they're gonna sway over. I don't think that's, I don't trust that. They might still throw their weight behind Roosevelt if they think I'm too progressive. Continuing to emphasize my promises to end mobilization and return the country to peace should be enough to convince them to set out this election. So that is probably true. That is what worked before, like in an earlier question. But we have the potential to win over more if we send our vice president. So Champ Clark has extensive connections within the Democratic establishment, but almost none in the Republican Party. These meetings are rather unproductive. It's acceptable. We don't lose any votes. I'll take that. How would you like to attack Roosevelt as you campaign this fall? Keep the message positive. No, I don't think we're going to do that. We have a lot to attack Roosevelt on, and we need to use those. We need to withdraw from the war in Europe. Roosevelt has consigned our boys to death in Flanders fields for little reason other than his own ego. He has shown a concerning passion for the horrors of war. Roosevelt claims to be a progressive, but he has actively worsened conditions for the working people in this country. His brutal strike-breaking tactics, sanctioning of poor factory safety, and indiscriminate draft policies makes him an enemy of the common man. Or TR stands for Tyrant Roosevelt. The president has restricted free speech, dragged us into an unjust war, enacted autocratic mobilization programs, and nationalized private industries. He must be stopped. I actually think this is probably going to win over more votes and is a good way to undercut Roosevelt's progressive support, is claiming that he's made working conditions worse for people. So we're going to talk about that. This attack is particularly persuasive to urban industrial workers who are facing worsening factory conditions due to the war effort. So that's solidifying our bases of support. New Jersey is a bigger prize than Wisconsin. We're going to go there. During today's rally, you notice dozens of men in trench coats lining the edges of the crowd. With the Sedition Act finally in effect, you fear these are Justice Department agents sent by Roosevelt to intimidate you into dropping your opposition to the war. How will you react? I'm bringing them up in my speech. They might try to arrest me on disloyal language. This is bordering on a coup attempt. How can a sitting president try to imprison his main political opponent a few weeks before an election? I don't really think that's necessary, and it is a gambling option, which I don't like. This is quite frightening. I will scale back my appearances and hope these men keep their distance. Or I will keep speaking as planned. Let's now talk about why the current conflict is unnecessary and morally bankrupt. I think that's the best option to do. If they aren't, Justice Department agents, it doesn't matter. And if they are, then they can't really do anything. If they're gonna arrest me, that just looks terrible for Roosevelt. So we're just gonna keep talking as usual. A shot rings out, the crowd scatters. The bullet enters your chest, but is partially stopped by your pocket copy of the Bible and a copy of your speech. Your aides carry you off of the stage. While rumors proliferate about the identity of the shooter, you're forced to remain in bed during the heat of the campaign. Roosevelt offers his condolences, then vigorously hits the trail. Wow. Okay, then I see how that is. Jeez, I wasn't expecting that. I was like, oh no, I'll be fine. There's no way these Justice Department agents would do anything. No, apparently they would do something. My bad. A cable from the front, October 22nd, 1916. The United States Army Air Service tragically reports the death of Lieutenant Quentin Roosevelt of the 95th Aero Squadron, President Theodore Roosevelt's 18-year-old son. Lieutenant Roosevelt was bravely carrying out reconnaissance behind enemy lines during the Battle of Le Trans-Lloyd when he was savagely ambushed by German fighter planes. The nation mourns for the president and his family. So, yeah. Roosevelt's son, even historically, did die in World War One. We can offer the president my sympathy, but think that such a tragedy wouldn't have occurred had we never been into this war in the first place. We're not going to do that. That's really distasteful. We're just going to express our sympathies. Roosevelt receives an outpouring of sympathy from the American people and major newspapers. He uses a somber occasion to proclaim that his son did not die for an ignoble cause. This will help his poll numbers. Which, yikes, that's rough. I will say that is very rough to deal with. Trying to think about how to turn this around. First up, we probably need to sway more of these states. I want to see if I can rebuild the coalition we had in the start. So we're going to go to California. In the twilight of campaign season, your headquarters in New York received a mysterious letter hand-delivered to the front desk. The sender claims he's a spy working for Abteilung 3B, Germany's clandestine intelligence agency. He has promised on Roosevelt and his cabinet that he believes could swing the election in your favor, but only if members of your staff meet his men at Nondescript Wharf in Brooklyn. So yeah, I'm not going to do that. Partially because it's just a gambling option, and partially because every time I've tried it in other run-throughs of this election, it's 9 times out of 10 a trap by Roosevelt. So we're just not going to meet with them. But we're still losing the election. Cable from the front, November 2nd, 1916. French forces have occupied Fort Vaux near Verdun, finally pushing back German troops after 9 months of fighting. Germany is on the run. Victory is at hand. So yeah. The French have only managed to recapture land the Germans took from them a few months ago. This is hardly a victory, and the Allied powers are no closer to winning this war than they were 9 months ago. I think that's the best thing we can say about this. I mean, it realistically isn't that big of a victory, even if it looks like it. So yeah. This may be true, but most Americans just want the tide of war to turn. Domestic support for the war is rising sharply due to the overwhelming positive press coverage. Which, oh my gosh. That is rough. Can we get Ohio back? Alright, so I think with this, it is probably safe to assume that the election is over. I think we lost pretty decisively, which sucks because that's what the map apparently is supposed to look like. West Coast will be key. I don't think we got a shot on the West Coast. Midwest might be good. New York is out of reach. It's either New York's or the Plains. Yeah, we gotta do Midwest because the Plains aren't a thing. So I don't think it's gonna deliver us the presidency, though. I think we lost this one. Yeah, there's very little hope that I actually win this, unless it's one of those instances where there's fake polling, which would suck, but... Or, well, it wouldn't suck, it would actually be great for me, but I doubt that's the case. Because, yeah, it looks like all these states are out of reach. Yep, even Indiana. And that seems about what I was predicting, so, yeah. We might get Ohio, Kentucky, and all that back, but outside of that, we're not getting anything. Especially when Missouri falls like that, so... Yeah. Roosevelt's already got this election in the bag. Yeah. The front page of the New York World is printed with this bold, depressing message. Your fourth bid for the presidency has failed, and it seems like you'll not be given an opportunity to launch a fifth. Despite the political tailwinds of an unpopular war, domestic disorder, and a fractured Republican Party, you not only lost, but lost by a solid margin. Your attempts to assemble a viable anti-war coalition have failed. The Second defeat has reinvigorated Republican progressives while dividing the Democratic establishment. With 4 straight presidential losses, Democrats find themselves confused on which direction to take the party. The 1920 nomination will probably see a pitched battle between progressives and conservatives, each blaming the other for the string of defeats. Party stalwarts are hoping Roosevelt will fumble his next term so badly that it won't matter who ends up on the ticket in 4 years. One question continues to haunt you, however. Would taking that meeting with those German agents have altered this outcome? I kind of feel like that's probably what you're supposed to do, because even before that meeting, it seemed like I was doing pretty well, aside from getting shot. But yeah, I really thought I had a pretty good coalition. It seemed like I was getting a lot of positive feedback aside from, a couple of victories at the front. So I do feel like you probably are supposed to take that meeting with Germany, especially if it's meant to set up for some controversy in the next campaign. But I think I ran a solid campaign, even if I lost an election that is apparently I'm supposed to win. I don't really know what I did wrong other than not taking that meeting with Germany. But anyways, this will end the video here. In the next new campaign trail video in this timeline, I'll be playing the 1920 follow-up election, where I'll be playing as Leonard Wood, who's a Republican challenger against William Jennings Bryan. So if you're interested in that, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. If there's anything I can do to improve, or any other elections you'd like to see me play, feel free to comment those down below. And I will see you guys in the next video.